workshops already, of these webinars. This is the fourth in the series, and unlike the other three, this one is really about conclusions and possibly also about some ideas for recommendations which we might take to other people. And the other three, just if in case you didn't get to see them all, the first one was about opportunities and challenges in local development in the post-COVID recovery, and was curated by Ursula. The second was focusing on, we called it Communities in Circles, and was looking at aspects of the circular economy and was curated by Maria. And the third was on new exclusions and was curated by myself. And we've got some people from each of those attending, including all three curators. And the idea of this session is, as I say, to draw out some conclusions. And I'm going to, I've cheated slightly, but what I'd like all of you to do is to make points in the chat, and I'll then bring you in. And the reason I say I've cheated slightly is that I've asked about half a dozen people who we've already had comments from through the questionnaire and so on, so they will already be making conclusions, and they'll go first. So we'll have 6 or 8, I think it's 8 altogether, short interventions by them. And then I'll throw the floor open, and I'll be looking at the chat to see who wants to make a further comment. So, you can use an example of your own. You can introduce a new example, or you can say what you think a recommendation should be, or some general conclusion of what we've heard from the previous 3 webinars, or what you think yourself. So that's the format. We're going to be fairly strict on the hour. We'll finish by 5 past 7 Central European summertime. So we've got an hour to go. And I'm going to kick off by asking Ursula to comment on her first conclusion that she wants to share with us all. So Ursula, the screen is yours. Oh no, in fact, before Ursula, sorry.
Exactly. I was surprised.
This is hopeless. Anyway, we need a new moderator. Before Ursula, we have Robert, who's going to just contribute something on resilience, which is something he introduced in the first workshop, but that's now three or four weeks ago, so we've slightly forgotten. So he had 5 points on resilience. So Robert, do you want to, and you're going to share your screen. Sorry, I cut you out by accident.
Great, thanks. Yes, good evening to everybody. In fact, I wanted to come back on the point on resilience I made, because resilience is so much popping up in this crisis talk. It has virtually become a buzzword, and it appears virtually everywhere where there is talking about social, economic, territorial development. Of course, with some justification. And what is more seldom is that it is operationalized in a way that local actors can use it for devising their own action plans for change, or even for relief at the local level. As an example for good governance practice, I stumbled upon the Bavarian Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Forestry, which published a guidance document on resilience and rural development, which was based on 2 university experts who went through all the experiences, papers, theories, empirical studies, etc. And with the aim to integrate, or to enable local actors to integrate the resilience concept into their local development strategies, but not only, but also in other RDP measures. So their main tenet was, if you are able to consider concurrently, that means at the same time, not trading off one against the other, but going at least together in a neutral way or in a synergetic manner, the 5 issues: climate protection and adaptation, resource preservation and biodiversity, securing basic services, local and regional value added, economic value added, and social cohesion, you can be kind of certain that you are still on a resilience path. And this guidance document also links these things with these items with the leader method, with the leader operational principles, and says that resilience processes are important because resilience has to produce. It's not a trait per se of systems. Resilience processes can be of very different order. They can be processes of persistence. Those are systems which could change, but don't need to change because they are robust against very big loads of stress. Resistance is a process where you already have to spend energy to resist, to kind of fend off damages, danger, risk, etc. These processes are more bouncing back. Recovery maybe is half bouncing back, half bouncing forward, because for recovering something, you have to mostly introduce or reorientate the system in a new way, reintroduce new elements. Think about restoring the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. You cannot use the old stuff again because it would have the same susceptibility to fire, etc. So they are doing something more, but in essence, they recover the previous substance. But the more interesting things for us are those things which mean bouncing forward, adapt to new situation tendencies, and transform. This is a big word which has been, let's say, used as a cheap coin in the last months, but transformation has to be purposeful. This already is a big task because mostly in history, it's kind of random thing which happens. It has to be purposeful in the direction of these 5 challenges. It has to be fast because we cannot afford losing more time, for example, facing climate change. It has to be gentle as well. Most transformations in history have been violent, have been more damaging than building. So where do we have good examples for that? And I think we have to go very, very consciously into these processes. But how do we recognize resilience processes? Mostly we know if something was resilient when it's over. Too bad. But there are 3 parameters which provide quite reliable accessing cues. First one, diversity, managing diversity. Second one, modularity. We have seen so many examples of diversity and modularity in the practice, in the local actions which we saw during the webinar series. The local markets, the circular economies, the need-oriented COVID relief from a fishery area in Germany and from activities in Napoli, Torino, etc. And the third thing, what we humans know better maybe than animals or the creatures out there is reflexivity. We have to consciously shape feedback cycles within and across scales so that information comes fast when something goes off the track. So if you keep these things not in maximum, but in optimum balance, then you can be sure even you're flying blind, but you can be certain that you are on something like a resilience path. Keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was excellent. I've been making notes as we go along, but that's just because it's a way of thinking. Let's move on to Ursula, who, as you remember, curated the first of the 3 workshops, which focused on post-COVID or COVID recovery opportunities and challenges. Ursula, I don't think you have a slide, so you can just.
Yes, no, we were not supposed to have slides actually.
No, no.
Very
but,
quickly.
Robert was given special dispensation.
Yes, I know exactly. He was. By the way, for this question just now in the chat, would this slide by Robert be available in? Normally, there is already a slide on resilience by Robert in the report from my workshop, for the first webinar. It's slightly different. I think Robert has slightly adapted it, but I'm sure we'll be able to also make.
There's more on it, yeah.
There's more on it, okay. Otherwise, yes, that webinar, I think that showed a nice range of examples from different types of areas, rural, coastal, and urban, of how at the local level, structured systematic action can be taken quickly to react to emergency. And that structured action, that actually made me think about the key word of what I wanted to share today is really time. Because of course, when crisis hits, what we need is a quick reaction. And that's important to have those structures created on the ground. And community-led local development, for example, is very much about creating structures, creating partnerships on the ground. And from the examples we saw, it's not only from that webinar where we had the leader lag from Spain, who was able immediately to go to its SMEs, to the local businesses, and find out what their needs were and react to them. And also in an urban context in Lisbon that was shown last week, again, there was already a partnership or a network of local organizations with a mapping of who is doing what and who can do what, and that made it possible to react much more quickly. So structures on the ground can help cutting some corners. And I was just trying to imagine what would happen if someone at the national level said, oh, before we can react, before we can help businesses, we would need to do a survey of what the businesses need at the national level. Think of the public procurement and the time it would have taken to find out all that information. At the local level, of course, it can be done much more quickly. So that's my main message. And that, of course, links with this articulation of top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches, and to be able to react quickly, that they have to work together. We were already discussing that a bottom-up initiative, if it's not structured, it cannot last very long. It has to be supported from the top sooner or later. But the point is that the top levels have to build like a level of degree of trust and allow the bottom level to act, because knowing that they would be able to do it more quickly and that they have better knowledge. So that was my maybe key message for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. That point about the need of support for the local initiatives, it chimes with something Hannes wants to bring in later. I'll bring him in later on sustainability, but also this idea that if you already have capacity out there, you can react very quickly. And we saw in your workshop, in fact, that Guadalajara had managed to do a survey very quickly to find out what the needs of business was, and use that to then articulate their response, which was, for example, on training on new hygiene systems in the COVID era, you know, how to mount the screens, all of that sort of thing for retail and so on. Okay, let's move on. And Maria's going to come second. And Maria was the curator of the second workshop on communities in circles. Maria, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Well, what I would like to do here is to make a reflection, so to think loud, let's say, about something that also was clear, that is inequalities. It means what this pandemic has brought up, because they were existing already, but they were exacerbated by this situation. And what we can see every day is that the starting points of this pandemic were different, and so the impact was different, and the way out will be also different and will have different impacts. And I think that these inequalities, when we think about the low qualified people, the low wage people, those are really those more threatened, and that they will be risking their jobs, too low their wages, the problem of the health, because normally these are the occupations that are more exposed in terms of health. And also they lack technology for the education, for instance, and they have difficulties in finding alternatives because they don't have the skills enough. So these are problems that we see coming out more and more, and we don't know exactly what is going to happen, because we will not be the same. When we say back to normal, it will never be back to normal, because even ourselves will be different from what we were before this pandemic. Yeah, and so this will have implications, and also it will have implications in terms of sectors. Which are the sectors that are essential for the economy, and which are those that are not essential, and the occupations also, and which is the relationship between them. And this is creating also a different matrix that comes out from this pandemic. And what I ask myself, I come to the examples that were presented in the workshop, the second workshop. For instance, the Urban project that was dealing with social inclusion, but also through production of healthy food, and so giving a certain circularity in different levels. So this one solution, because in line with what Robert and Ursula said, that more than ever there will be the need for solutions that are participated and in which the people will really have a word to say. Then the road markets that we also saw, that it was the dynamic that was created to bring people really to be active for themselves also, but also in this context of the environment. And there are other examples of this. So I think that this is something that has to be reflected about, because the differences will be big, and we don't know exactly at which extension as Robert said, the old solutions have to be changed to be facing the real problems that are going to appear. Because, for instance, when I think in terms of the situation, even in the countries that have a direct impact on the local level, the debt, the higher debts that some countries will have in the end than the others, are there conducting to austerity measures again. And who will be those that will be suffering again more with that? Again, those that are already more vulnerable. Yeah. So I think that I would stop here. This is really only a reflection that I would like that we could discuss.
Okay, thanks very much. And in fact, on this question of inequalities, one of the things we heard very much from Naples, but also I think it comes through particularly from the southern countries, is that those in the informal economy were very much missed out by most of the government measures. By definition, they weren't on the radar, and they have suffered extremely. So some people might say, well, that serves them right if they're not paying taxes and so on. But obviously, they're very often people who are only surviving at the very margins of the economy, and would not actually be paying much tax anyway. Let's move on. And I think Rui wants to, I'm not going to make a comment. Although I was the curator of the third workshop, which focused on these new exclusions, I've asked Rui to come in, and who's based in Lisbon, in fact, a councillor in Lisbon, to talk a little bit about some of what he thinks is the conclusion of our workshop on the third one. Rui.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Peter. First, it is nice to add some comments over after the previous interventions. I hope not to talk too much on what were my own experiences and choices presented in the previous workshop. Maria was saying, which for me is something very clear, which is that COVID affected deeper the poor and the small. What I believe the couple of examples shown last week was that urban CLLD approaches shown very effective already in different emergency responses. And this goes from medical supply productions to education, foods, well, in several emergency immediate responses, and these networks and this mapping and this acting directly on the ground with the organizations, using the human resources on the ground, spending money where it is needed the most anyway, and so with double impacts. And this is because, and not only for now but also for the future, that any system, CLLD alike, which is by definition an atomized form of deploying top-down funds within a bottom-up infrastructure organization, not only is way more focused and efficient, so cost efficient, as it uses and replies to those, again, poor and small. So not to take much longer, just to say as kind of recommendations, I believe it is crucial at this moment and not later in history to enjoy this opportunity and this know-how and this networks and this commitment and courage existing on the ground now. And it's not clearly, well, it's not just the southern countries. It is everywhere, including in eastern countries with more with a history of more centralized forms of power, to deploy, to use, to enjoy these structures for to use to employ the underspending of the present, well, the ending programming period and the recovery and resilience program. It would be stupid not to do it. But from this to say that for the next programming period, we must reinforce not only CLLD budgets, but also to enlarge the fields of actions, the topics where CLLD needs to be tested, to be used, and in a completely aligned form with the renewed European priorities like energy transition, digitalization, housing, on top of the inclusion, the employment, the known pillars of the cohesion and the social and the European social funds and ERDFs alike. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a very clear message of widening the field of action. So obviously everyone wants more money. We have issues with underspend in this program period, which could be mopped up in this type of way. We also have the transition to the next period, where there's always a delay, and that delay needs to be minimized. But this idea of widening the field of action of community-led local development approaches to target some of the new priorities, the energy transition, digitalization, housing, and there's going to need to be work on employment as well, I would add. Thank you very much, Rui. Daniela's already come in with a comment about the informal economy, and I don't know if that's the main point you wanted to make, because I was going to bring you in anyway, Daniela, but could you perhaps explain how that's happening? The problem of if you cut out a group, you lead them to be exposed to the illegal economy, not just the informal economy. Can you develop that point perhaps, and then say any other conclusions you wanted to draw from, you featured in the second workshop, I remember, the second webinar.
Yeah.
So Daniela, over to you. Thanks.
So, hi everyone, nice to see you again. So I was writing in the chat, but it's much quicker to speak. So nice to be together again. So actually the point I was making about, I mean, this is something that in Italy is being discussed a lot, definitely not sufficiently, but it's the fact that within the year of the pandemic, the public administration was very slow in providing support, and especially providing support towards those people who were not formally within the system. This has meant that this is a very specific condition to Italy, but I'm sure you can translate it with the due differences towards your own countries, is that mafia organizations on the ground, and I can assure you they are not active only in Sicily or so on, they are active all over Italy and in your countries as well, have been very quick in providing support. So from food packages to also, for example, providing very cheap loans, initially cheap loans, which means that a lot of people are then more and more dependent on the mafia organization. So you can imagine, we can already see what this will be the pattern on the longer term. This is from a sort of co-opting fragile people in, for example, in our peripheric neighborhoods, but not only. But then this on a wider scale, so this also means, for example, purchasing a lot of businesses, because a lot of small businesses were needing support and have been basically bought up by mafia organizations, but also buying, for example, real estate. So in the context of Italy, for example, this is a very big discussion in Rome, where I am at the moment. We already know, because we are one of the headquarters, let's say, of most of the mafia organization, is that this is something that is currently one of the major issues, because to some extent we already lost against these organizations. And I would like to connect somehow to what also Rui was saying about the importance of instruments like the CLLD that are supporting civic organizations. Because one of the issues that we have is a lot of countries have not adopted CLLD within their pluriannual financial framework, so the agreement on which their countries will use the EU funding. Theoretically, they can invent some alternative instrument, but if there isn't the political will to do that, it means that there won't be a co-decision making or somehow a way for which the money also arrives on the ground, deciding the priorities together with the local community. So a question that I also have for us, that I think we're all trying to work on together towards, is if we're in a context in which there isn't the political willingness to go towards this type of civic networks working on the ground towards this, and if these networks are basically running on voluntary work, how can we ensure, especially in times of crisis like the ones that we're in, that they will be able to really find counter solutions towards the crisis we're in? And this is something that I don't have a solution. We're all working towards this now, but this is one of the big issues that we definitely have, for example, in a lot of, for sure in Rome, but also in a lot of cities. And I know also from some of the cities that I think believe also from the names you might be coming from, this might be something that we also have to see what would be the ways to strengthen the civil society, especially when you don't have public administration at whatever level that is providing the resources that would enable this, because there might not be the political will.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. And I think what also this idea that if the local state has created a vacuum by not responding, then someone else will step in. And in Italy, that someone else is the money lending mafia. I remember reading that in the south of Italy, fresh bread production is now a mafia business, as well as we know as a waste organization or disorganization as well, all of these things. So whenever there's a vacuum, someone else is going to take up the space. And in fact, we heard from Giuseppe Pace last time that in Napoli, there was a problem, that there was a lot of solidarity in the early days, but it tended to dwindle because there was not enough support from the municipality and from the government. Whereas in Turin, there was better support coming in through foundations. Let's move on. I've had a couple of comments which I'll bring in a moment. Enrica's come in. Now, Vanessa, we don't know if you're there because of the famous washing machine, but you had some comments you wanted to. It was a delivery. You know how difficult it is in COVID times if you have to stay in all day to receive a delivery. But if you're there, you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm still here.
Vanessa's in Scotland, and we were
washing machine
sharing
arrived.
stories earlier on.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just interested actually from the perspective of local experience here. I mean, I do work at kind of European and national levels as well, but we've had the most fantastic local experience where I live with a networking group organization that's basically run by volunteers that was able to pull together in breakneck speed all of the communities that exist within a very small region. It's 10,000 population, is this very small region called the Black Isle, where we live, which comprises
just north of Inverness, for those.
North of Inverness, yeah. Comprises seven villages, and then quite a lot of people living on farms and in smaller houses and things like that. So at the beginning of COVID, we were able to pull together a weekly Zoom meeting. That's how it began. And we got all of the main community organizations in the area, including all the 7 community councils, different sort of well-being organizations, tourism environment groups, youth groups, etc. And once a week throughout the whole of the last year and a half, we have met on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock for 1 hour, along with the local authority, etc. And so we actually applied to be an anchor organization to take national government money for supporting COVID right at the very beginning. And this was actually really, really essential, very important. It was easy access, small grants that could be dispensed through basically a civil society group like ours. And it enabled a huge amount to happen. We set up local larders, food distribution, financial support to people in poverty, befriending services, etc., etc. And a huge number of people have actually been mobilized to come behind this within this wider area. And it's enabled us to go on to looking at the future. So we're looking at the tourism challenge, which is, this is a tourist area, and we've got lots of challenges with tourism going forward. Good food, we've now got a good food strategy, and we're looking at how to really look at local produce and access to it, and access for people who have got reduced incomes. Young apprentice scheme to get into local businesses, well-being for young, vulnerable, wider community, all of these things. So it's happened remarkably quickly. There was an impetus from the funding that came from the national government, which was no strings attached, really money, which was fantastic, absolutely wonderful. And the knowledge and enthusiasm of the local people and the ability to pull everybody together. And it's amazing what you can do with 1 Zoom meeting a week. It's quite incredible. So, all of the things that we've been learning about in these webinars that you've been running, in a sense, with the local experience we have, are backed up completely, helping the democratic process. The power of bringing people together, it's immense, actually. If you can effectively bring people together, there's so much more you can do. And also bringing together the different layers of the government, from national to regional to local, in support of and not actually dominating what people are doing within their communities. And because of the emergency of COVID, this was all allowed to happen. And the lesson for me out of all of this is that if you release the capacity of local people, and you enable with easy access funds or whatever that might be, and this comes to CLD, of course, the ability of communities to rise to challenges and to actually work out exactly what needs to be done locally is absolutely enormous. So I just wanted to add that experience in a way in support of so many of the things that we've been talking about in these webinars at a kind of a more general level, shall we say.
Vanessa, can you just tell us how much money was put on the table by the national government? That's the Scottish government in your case, yeah?
Well, yes, and I mean, it was money that came from the UK government for COVID, and it went through the Scottish government and then out from there. I forget exactly how much. There were many different funding packages that came out. It was quite a lot of money. It really was. You know, it was
Okay.
quite a lot of money at the beginning, but then that was handed out, and I think we've had something like £70,000 or £80,000 worth of that money within our area. But you know, it was actually quite a bit of money from the national government.
All right. Thank you very much for that. So the power of bringing people together, I think, is your message, and putting money on the table always helps. Joanna, I wondered if you wanted to come in. I think you're in Estonia at the moment, but I get a bit confused between whether it's Estonia or
Well,
Latvia.
that's partly because I actually work for an Estonian University of Life Sciences, but I live in Latvia, so I'm over the border.
You can see why I was confused.
Yes, I can quite understand. And my research has been on the rural landscapes of Estonia and Latvia, so I do cover both aspects. Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I mean, I have been an online worker for many years, or studying anyway, because I did my PhD last year, and then I'm also working for the Estonian University now. So, you know, I've had to learn to work online, and my internet has been sort of almost like a barometer of the situation in Latvia and Estonia. I mean, they've got a very good, both countries actually have very good internet access, even in the rural areas, usually through mobile phones and whatever. So it went really bad. Then they put up a new tower and we had really good internet, and then COVID happened. And my internet diminished overnight, you know, sort of thing. And you could almost say lockdown meant my internet deteriorated. Released from lockdown, my internet improved. So that was really quite an interesting experience of sort of showing how much people were moving out of the cities into the rural areas. And in Latvia and Estonia, if there is a crisis, I mean, this happened in 2008, people did, you know, move back to the rural areas because they had space, they had places where they could grow food, where there was more family support and that sort of thing. But really, depopulation just continued, you know, sort of like there was, this is a crisis in rural areas that's been ongoing and a very slow one. But what COVID, I think, has shown is that resources and, you know, this sort of, there is not the barrier to being out in the rural areas that we have imagined. So this sort of like the access to the internet has proved that it is possible to live out in the rural areas successfully, you know, because for a whole year people have been out. Like I said, I can tell, you know, how much of a lockdown there is by the internet access I have got. So it then leaves us with two aspects. One is the possibilities of what can be done with this, you know, digitalization and what can be done in the rural areas, the opportunities for entrepreneurship and that kind of thing. But also, if you have this influx, I mean, Latvia and Estonia have a lot of space, and a lot of people do have summer houses with a little bit of land. So they've got the opportunity that some of the more densely populated places do not have. But this opportunity to move out means if we have a large influx of people coming out of the cities and living in the rural areas, how do we integrate those people into the rural areas without rural people feeling overwhelmed and marginalized again? Because, you know, just because of sometimes the difference in education levels and that sort of thing, opportunities, etc., can then, you know, bring the inequality almost in your face. And so these are things that we need to then think about. Yes, the opportunities are there, and it would be good to have a flourishing social sort of network back in the rural areas. But how will that work in practice is something I'm really sort of grappling with.
I think that's a really interesting question, especially in countries which have had heavy depopulation, which I know that Latvia has had in the rural areas in particular. But also it's not easy, Enrique mentioned this, it's not every rural area that wants to see all the urban people arriving, especially if they take all your internet bandwidth. That would really upset me here. So yes, thank you. So the opportunity in the rural areas, but also some issues around it. I've got a few people lined up who've made comments who I'm going to bring in a bit later. I've got Toby Johnson and Ernesto, but before we get to them, I've got Hannes who wrote in saying he wanted to make a point about sustainability, and Enrique who wants to make a Nieto who wants to make a point about capacity building. Enrique who contributed in the third webinar. So let's start with Hannes if you're there. Can you say what you wanted to say about sustainability, and whether you mean at the project level or at the sort of level of communities? Have we got you here? Sometimes people go off for a coffee, so okay.
I can't say Hannes at the moment.
Okay, we'll leave Hannes for the moment then. Let's move on to yes, to Enrique if you're there still. And you wanted to make a point.
Yes, I'm here. I just
hi.
Hi.
You popped up just like that.
I just want to make two quick points. Some of them building on what it was said. I think we mentioned there are opportunities and there are challenges, but I think what it's key here is in order for local communities to react to that is to have the capacities for them to mobilize themselves. So for me, social capital is key. And many of the responses for the new opportunities emerging that offer a solution to or are part of the transition or a transformational change that is needed in many of the areas after the COVID is based on the social capacity, the social capital, and their capacity to cooperate. And I think this issue of cooperation at the local level is key. And we are seeing examples where the communities that were able to mobilize themselves and cooperate quickly were those that were able to cope faster with the impact of COVID. But I want to add also another point, because within that transformational change, I think innovation is crucial. And this is perhaps some of the areas where in the last decade, I would say, was a bit hampered in rural areas mainly. And it was innovation was a bit not that present at the moment. And in here I want to bring again the point of cooperation, because we are talking about here a digital transition, we're talking about a green transition, and perhaps there is a need for vertical cooperation. I'm not sure whether all local communities have the capacity just at the local level to provide a response to these new areas. And I think here the vertical cooperation, not only with public authorities, but as well with institutions, with SMEs or bigger companies that work outside the territory, and bringing these two levels together. So the local know-how and the external know-how on these areas will be beneficial for local communities. And of course, to do that, we need, as you were mentioning, flexible and easy to access mechanisms that support this type of cooperation. And if I can bring just a practical example, in the agricultural sector, there is, in addition to Leaders LD, which I think can play a role, there are already instruments to enable cooperation and to support, for instance, preparatory support for these new innovative ideas. They give flexibility for testing and piloting, but it's just reduced to the agricultural sector, and there is as such a gap for this type of innovation tools beyond the agri sector in rural areas. So thinking about digitalization, thinking about health, new ways of delivering health services, thinking about education, energy, and tourism, and many others. There are already some tools, but they are not that much exploited by the managing authorities either. So I think a combination of these tools with Leader, I think, would be very powerful as well in rural areas.
So there's a need for also for social innovation more generally within the rural areas, which is not being currently financed out of the existing rural development programs, which are focusing perhaps too much on the farmers and not enough on the communities. Okay, I've got Maria wants to come back in, but before I bring her in, there's Ernesto, and I don't know if Toby Johnson wants to comment. He said he was being too pessimistic, but it's always good to have some cold water, Toby, so you can pour if you wish.
Well, I will say something, because
go on.
I was just struck with this relentlessly sort of upbeat idea that local communities can do everything, and isn't it great? And of course, it is great what they've done, but why do we have any inkling of hope that when we have a new equilibrium after the crisis, it will be any different from before? You know, why do we think that anybody cares politically about local capacity? It's been shown that they don't really. And if we look back to last crises, maybe say World War II, home defense was organized locally because communication, we didn't have internet then. So the army, the state had to delegate to local areas and resistance groups and so on. So they were all incredibly local. That was a local act of resistance in Robert's terms, to establish it is, and it isn't going to want to delegate. And at the same time, it knows that it has to delegate to get an effective, quick response. And we saw that a bit in Britain with the NHS, which did test and trace and vaccinations better than the national government's cronyism attempted to do. So somewhere at the high levels of government, they know that they have to have local capacity and local ability to act, but they're incredibly reluctant to let it go. What can we do to show that it is a way forward to resilience, and we need to make much of it and do an incredibly powerful lobby based on this, that it has changed the paradigm. Okay, that's what we need to do. I'm not actually 100% convinced we can do it, but maybe we should try.
So you're emphasizing the local level is a route to resilience, but in a sense, we always see with central government and actually also with regional governments that subsidiarity only goes so far. It goes to them, but they never devolve below their own level. And this is also true of city administrations and most counties too, this reluctance to really devolve power. And I don't know, I think Peter Lloyd's raised the same point. Where is the politics that will sustain it into a movement, is what Peter's just said on the chat. And Pedro said local resilience groups. So that's perhaps a rallying cry, since he put an exclamation mark. Yes, and we'll perhaps, you can add to that, Pedro, in a moment. Ernesto, you had a point, and I don't know if have I already tried to bring you in? Yes, and you've made a point, but you weren't there. I think that's the point. But Ernesto, if you're there, do join in.
Yeah, thank you. I won't take much time. I just want to share my concern. I'm an Italian professor, and I always had all my activities in the Italian context. So my vision maybe is to Southern European. Maybe I'm biased, and it's not true
Ernesto,
for German
could you turn off
or Scandinavian. I have 10 years of.
Your sound is breaking up.
Yeah.
Could you just immobilize your picture?
Yeah, sorry.
And we'll listen to you, because I think it might work better. Thanks. Okay, go.
Yeah, I hope it's better.
Yeah.
I was just saying that I just want to share my concern that maybe to Southern European concern, but it might be not true for my colleagues in Northern Europe. But my Italian experience is on the other side. I have 10 years of visiting professorship in Belgium, so I know how it works in Northern Europe, which is quite different. But anyway, the most of the structure funds have been dedicated in the last 45 years in the Southern European countries, and there the very bottleneck is the public administration. In all the situation, and speaking about rural areas, marginal areas, I always had the feeling that apart from the great willing of the people in the local community to get the message and try to make it out all the best from the tools put in force by depends by the people, okay, depends by it was before spending for making roads, or now we had money for making the things more intelligent, connected, and so forth, so on. So the local community get the message, try to do the best, but the very bottleneck was the public administration. And one problem, especially with the CLD approach, was that the regional authority didn't want to leave the power of controlling money. This has been the major problem. The local action groups has been dried out of the possibility of controlling the money. So there was a over control from the regional authorities, saying no to almost everything, speaking about the process of spending the money landed through the structural funds. This is what I see one of the most problem of putting forward important reaction to the challenges that we have to tackle in the next 10, 15 years with the reacting to the crisis. That's it. That's my idea.
Okay, and we completely take that point about the capacity of the local administration in municipalities. In the Netherlands, for example, that's never a problem. The local administration is, fantastically efficient. But in other parts of Europe, and it's not only the South, it can be enormously frustrating. So yes, point well made and well taken. And in some ways, sometimes we need almost a bypass for each level of administration. We used to call one for the UK the Westminster bypass, because we had to go around them when Thatcher was in power. But then at local level, sometimes the mayor is the biggest problem. Maria wanted to come in with a particular example. I don't know if it's the one you've mentioned in your note about the URBAC network, but come on anyway, Maria. This was an example of capacity building, I think.
Not only of capacity building, it was of a governance model. Yeah. So
okay.
That a city that had a municipal council for volunteering, in which the mayor is the president of this group and the president of the municipality. And this makes an interaction in the policy design. And these volunteers, so they are responsibilized by the 4 programs of the social policy of the municipality. And they work on this. And
which municipality again?
Sorry?
Which municipality?
Is Atieno in Cyprus.
Okay.
Yeah, and this model was replicated in another 7 cities with a lot of success. And what helped to be even more successful was the fact that the pandemic was requiring exactly a model like that. And so they had the model structured when the pandemic came, and then they could react much quicker. And some of the cities even got prizes at national level for their resilience and for the way that, and this convinced them of really being the best to do. Yeah, so I wanted to give this example because I think it's much in line with what was said. Yeah.
And in fact, we hear very few examples out of Cyprus, so it's nice to hear one. But just going back to the previous 2, Toby and Ernesto, I think you make important points. Toby about the central government being reluctant to give up anything, and Ernesto about the capacity issues at the local level, not just capacity, but also ingrained hierarchies, silos, all sorts of awful signature systems, lack of digitization, all sorts of issues in the public administration at local level in many countries, but you were highlighting the southern countries. So yeah, we mustn't be Pollyanna-ish about how wonderful everything, how rosy everything is in the garden, even though I thought Ursula's cherry blossom was very pretty at the beginning on that theme. We're more or less running up to 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in Portugal and UK and Ireland. So I don't know if anyone wants to make any final, it would have to be very quick. We had a comment from Martin Netzer, which I didn't completely understand. He said, being small and able to dock is an opportunity. Martin, do you want to just explain that? And Pedro possibly could join us and just tell us a little bit about what you see local resilience groups, how are they different from a local action group? But I don't know if Martin wants to join us first.
I wanted to say that if you are small, or the community or a group of people who want to do something, they are very good when they are able to connect and to dock on other groups.
Okay, so it's like being connected to.
Yes, yes.
And do you mean connected in a vertical direction, upwards, or more in a horizontal direction with other groups?
More with other groups from the same, but also with some input from above. Yes.
Okay. And who is my other comment coming from? From Pedro. Do you want to add anything on local resilience groups? And then I wondered if
yes,
Robert...
Peter, it was rather provocative, because I think after 30 years of leader, yeah, the question is, should maybe someone change the name of the local action groups? But I think action is still in the center, of what the CLLD approach is about. And resilience is, of course, now coming more and more important. It's a very interesting aspect. And but there are many other things, and I think Enrique, for example, it seemed that he avoided to talk about resilience. He was talking still about innovation and about many other things. You could ask yourself, is resilience the new innovation? And these are, I mean, different words which are all important. And I just wanted to be a little bit provocative. Was the only thing. There was no concrete thought behind.
Okay. All right. And perhaps I was thinking of, if Robert's still there, if we could go back and say, how is your resilience map looking, or your resilience, your 5 resilience points looking following this discussion? I don't know if you want to add a pithy conclusion.
Yes, not only the 5 resilience, let's say, orientations, but also the 3 characteristics or structural features, which is diversity, modularity, and reflexivity. I think I almost made a comment when Daniela spoke about Mafia, and also the professor from Italy about the failure of the public administration in those direct emergency and relief activities. I think that Mafia organizations are among the most resilient systems on earth. And it's a pity to lose people to these organizations, because the legitimate governance is not able to be at least a little bit better than them in serving their basic needs. I think in general, what Martin said, small initiatives which are connective. This is an ideal, let's say, premise of modularity. Innovation usually comes from the bottom, and you don't have to wait for be invited to innovate or be encouraged to innovate from above, because some benevolent regimes do that. But it's better to do the first step, to innovate, and then let it be known by all the other scales of decision making, and they can then help to let's spread it out, to scale it up, to mainstream, to generalize innovation. Because in the first place, what the upper levels of governance are interested in is restoring a previous state of stability, because that's what they are comfortable with. It's very seldom that upper levels of governance start with innovation. It's more an exception, a historical exception, and local initiatives have to look at these windows in the clouds and then connect to these windows and say, okay, the solution you are generally searching for, we have done it practically. And look at it and look how we can scale it, how we can spread it, how we can make it the new normal. So innovation always, or as a rule, comes from bottom up. And sometimes we are lucky to find the right moment, the right governance configuration to spread and to multiply it. There was just a question about the trade-offs. I said you should serve the 5 fields, watching not to produce trade-offs, to make something worse, to make other things better. Sometimes the solution lies in time. So even if you are focusing, for example, on local value added, you may at a later point in time try to fix other things. So you cannot do things at the same time. Sometimes also you can weigh, or you can kind of play with different capitals. You can, if in the absence of financial capital, social capital becomes much more relevant. But you can use financial capital to build up social capital. And one of the purposes of CLLD is building up social capital, because then you have it when you need it.
Okay, Robert, I'm going to have to draw you to a close.
Thank you.
But thank you very much. That was a very useful contribution. I know that Hannes is back, and I just wondered if we could hear his contribution, if he's still available.
I'm there, and I apologize. I got lost locally with my grandchildren in the garden.
It can happen.
I really just got lost. What I think what Robert said was very important, and I come back to this whole history of leader. Of course, it was the allowing of the EU against most member states that local should be decisive in rural development. And LEADER at the beginning was exactly that. It was allowing the sprout to come up. And then immediately our experience in my home island, small home island with 1,000 people, was the regional government immediately wanted to get control over it. So that is not what Robert meant. This is not the welcoming of the sprout. I think the most important thing is that we can convince whatever level that is further up from the local to get in touch and understand that the innovation Robert was mentioning is not just a pain for them, but a chance to get, certain responsibility transferred to the people who do the innovation. I think that message is key. It's not understood, and we've seen it. Ursula will remember in Poland, the whole message we did through Prepare also was always the energy is on the local level, the knowledge is on the local level. And the people that are above that local level in governance have to understand that the innovation comes from there. And that is all about resilience too. That is the place where the things happen. Sorry, I was late. I got completely
No worries, no worries. Thank you very much for that contribution.
I didn't mean it.
I'm going to bring in Rui just quickly because he wants to make a couple of policy recommendations. And just to highlight from a comment from Peter Lloyd on the chat, saying that we're still at the journey. He's saying the journey is still incomplete, but we need to be realistic in considering the political dimension. And this is one of the problems that the central governments, especially when they're in their pomp, as they are in several countries at the moment across the European Union, without singling out any in particular, I'd say Hungary, Poland, and UK are particularly problematic in terms of centralization and closing down options. Those types of governments don't want to listen to the local level. Let's just, that's perhaps too political. Let's just hear quickly from Rui, and then we'll close off. Thank you, Rui.
Thank you, Peter. I promise 2 seconds. First, I can't disconnect without saluting the courage of what Daniela was saying out loud. That's first. Second, that we've tried in Lisbon, even following some previous The Hague CLLD, urban CLLD experience, which was we deployed, we granted 5 million ESF in Lisbon just last summer under a decision of the local people voting on each district. Imagine the potential on this, on breaking all the barriers that we've been speaking about throughout this session. Thank you.
Yeah, a point from Ernesto saying that not having mandatory CLLD, especially, I mean, it is mandatory in a sense in there is a 5% threshold for leader, but for urban areas, we haven't had mandatory CLLD, and that's meant that we have very, very few examples like Lisbon and The Hague to share. And in fact, if anyone does have examples of urban CLLD, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, we'd like to hear about them. Okay, there's a fantastic lot of comments coming through. We can't keep up everything because we've always said that this is a short session. We've already gone 5 minutes over. So I'm going to draw a close now, but I'd just like to thank all the contributors and the audience for joining, to say that we're going to be holding a repeat series. It won't be an exact repeat because we want to focus more on the policy level. And this will be taking place in June within the framework of the Regional Studies Association, which is a worldwide association of people interested in regional studies. And they're having a virtual conference, only virtual conference. And I think our dates are the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th, but Harris might correct me.
Correct.
So yeah, it's going to be on Thursdays, but a bit earlier in the Thursday. So we'll be running from 3 till 4:30 CEST because their timings work off the UK. And so we'll send out publicity on that nearer the time, and we'll be able to pick up some of these threads with some of the similar examples, but focusing more on the policy level and how things need to change. With that, I'd like to thank everyone again and say goodbye and have a good evening. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Deus obrigada.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.